Son Gohan, exploding onto the scene with the beginning of Dragon Ball Z, telling a courageous and inspirational coming-of-age story, from unassuming and shy to courageous and heroic. From would-be attempted main character to utter modern-day obscurity. The story of Son Gohan is one of monumental highs and heartbreaking lows, with many in the community still upset decades later with how his character was handled and continues to be handled today. So a while back, I put up a poll on my Twitter asking the question, who was the most disappointing character in Dragon Ball? Leaving options like Jiren, Piccolo, and Majin Buu alongside Gohan. And despite Jiren's character direction at this time being a meme for how terrible it was, Gohan still managed to make it a close race, racking up more votes than the similarly mishandled Piccolo and the vapid caricature Majin Buu combined. So today I want to take an in-depth look at Gohan's character, to find out what worked and why it worked, and to finally figure out what went wrong to cause this fall from grace, all in an attempt to answer the age-old question, is it too late for Son Gohan?
No, it's not too late. Move! I said move!
Right out the gate on Gohan's first big outing, Akira Toriyama demonstrated to us everything we needed to know about Gohan as a character. He was polite but shy, and when Raditz arrives, Gohan is seen grabbing tightly onto Goku's leg, further communicating that he is very much prone to fear, as most children are. Gohan was made to look unremarkable. And that's important because in a show like Dragon Ball, where fighters need to be confident and want to fight, you would think that Gohan seems like a terrible fit, but in reality, from a writing perspective, Gohan's size, fear, and reluctance to fight were his biggest strengths in making him a compelling and fun character to watch, when Akira Toriyama added a certain extra ingredient to his character: an explosive temper. It might seem like a rather rudimentary concept, but it's actually more sophisticated than you might think. You see, everything from Gohan's design as a character to his sensibilities as a person serve to exponentially increase the effectiveness of these instances where he loses control. In other words, the most fun that's had with Gohan occurs when he is made to feel scared and small when pitted up against someone who is very evil and large. Right off the bat, from a visual standpoint, it's made abundantly clear that this isn't a fair fight, and so there's a very clear power dynamic established. In this instance, not only is Gohan much smaller than his foe, but he is also only a young child. And the more helpless and small a character looks compared to their foe, the more shocking and satisfying it is when that small character ultimately takes down that larger individual. Speaking on the topic of reactive characters, K.M. Weiland said, "This is probably the most important thing to understand about the reactive protagonist. His reactivity is almost solely the result of the fact that he is not the one who is controlling the conflict. The antagonistic force is firmly in control at this point. Stuff is happening to the protagonist, and he can't stop it." In other words, for Gohan's angry moments to achieve their desired effect, Gohan can never be the one to pick the fight. He must be provoked, because if he picks that fight, he becomes a bully. And so writing Gohan as a shy, kind, and passive character creates every opportunity to avoid being a bully. The more scared Gohan is, the more courageous he seems when he overcomes that fear for the right reasons. And this was a formula that Akira Toriyama used to great effect when writing for Gohan through various arcs. Typically speaking, active characters are usually the most interesting and compelling characters to watch, because they are the characters that drive the story forward through their own choices and actions. When an active character is on screen, you pay attention because this is the person that moves the story forward. This style of character works particularly well for protagonists. And so, reactive characters, as the name implies, react to the plot as it unfolds. Gohan is a reactive character, but one that was designed to take full advantage of that fact, reacting to those that pick a fight for despicable reasons. And during these specific instances is more interesting and fun to watch than many of the other active characters in the story. The Cell Saga was where Gohan's character underwent a fundamental change, one that reconciled much of Gohan's character's baggage and saw to the climax of his character arc. K.M. Weiland, when speaking on characters undergoing change, says, particularly if your protagonist is following a change arc, he's also going to be struggling to understand a lot of his own motives at this point in the story. He's in the grip of the lie, and his blindness about himself, just as much as any other factor, is causing him to get smacked around during this part of the story. In other words, right before Gohan ultimately becomes the person he was always supposed to be, he held on to this belief that he wasn't good enough and struggled to come to grips with his feelings on the justification of killing someone. This was something he needed to be pushed to the point of snapping in order to act on in the past. However, now, having reconciled this lie with the truth that it is okay to do everything in your power to protect the Earth, Gohan has changed on a fundamental level from who he was at the beginning of this arc, to someone who now assumes the responsibility as Earth's defender. The climax to the Cell Saga was in many respects like the ending to Gohan's story, or at least the ending to the main one he was telling up until that point, one that was celebrated by fans and critics alike. And the trouble with that is, where do you go from here? It isn't immediately clear. So in a sense, it's as if Akira Toriyama tasked himself with writing a sequel to a celebrated movie, a sequel to one of the most satisfying character journeys in anime. And it didn't work. This is modern day Gohan. And this is the Gohan that everyone who voted in that poll at the beginning of the video were thinking of when they saw his name on the list. When introduced to the story in early Dragon Ball Z, Gohan, as I said, was designed to look and act as though he was unremarkable, to subvert expectations and to complement the dynamic he brought to every major confrontation he was in. But this Gohan, the one we have today, is unremarkable, contributing little more to the series than simple recreations of classic great scenes and moments from his origin story. Simple, hey, remember this type moments, lacking intention and consequences. He's become quite literally a nostalgia act. A similar brand of character fatigue has plagued other series favorites like Piccolo, although in different ways. Having played an important role in Dragon Ball from his unveiling, Piccolo was and in many ways persists in being a fan favorite, despite there truly being nothing to celebrate with regards his character anymore. Dragon Ball Super also saw to the rise of the character that took first place in our poll at the beginning of this video, as being the most disappointing character in Dragon Ball. And while I can appreciate why people have a great distaste for the shonen trope caricature that is Jiren the Grey, I can't say he's more disappointing than Gohan. Disappointment is a result of expectations not being met, and I can't say I expected as much from Jiren as I did for the future of this guy. It's clear to me. So, what went wrong? In Daizenshu 1, the first of many official guidebooks released after the series had concluded, featured 2 popularity polls taken during the course of the series, each ranking the 5 most popular characters of that given time. The first of these polls appeared in Weekly Shonen Jump from 1993, issue 12, towards the end of the Cell games, featuring the chapter where Cell self-destructs. It lists Gohan in first place, followed by Goku, Trunks, Vegeta, and Piccolo. The second of the 2 popularity polls appears in Weekly Shonen Jump 1995, issue 5 and 6, near the end of the Buu arc, featuring chapter 501 where a Gotenks-absorbed Buu continues to beat up on Gohan. In first place sees Goku, followed by Vegeta, Trunks, Gotenks, and Piccolo. Gohan is not even on the list. But what makes this more interesting is that between these 2 polls, after the 7-year time skip, on the cover of chapter 421 presents a message from Master Roshi saying, Dragon Ball will continue for just a tad longer. From now on, taking the place of the late Goku as the main character will be the serious-minded Son Gohan. Clearly this arc did not end with Gohan being the main character, and the only comment made about this by Akira Toriyama came from an interview conducted after the series had concluded. He says, I intended to put Gohan into the lead role. It didn't work out. I felt that compared to Goku, he was ultimately not suited for the part. So why didn't the character work out? Well, if I was to read into this, and again, this is my own speculation, Akira Toriyama, up until this point in Dragon Ball, had been writing it with Goku, the active protagonist. Active protagonists, as I've said before, have a built-in charisma of sorts and, most importantly, a compelling formula, because they drive the story. They make things happen. Gohan, on the other hand, is a reactive character, meaning he reacts to the story as it happens to him more than he drives the plot. What's interesting about this is that most characters in movies and TV shows tend to start their hero's journey as passive or reactionary characters, and as the story progresses, the protagonist shifts into a more active role with agency over the plot. This describes the arc Gohan found himself on from the Saiyan Saga to the Cell Saga. Beginning, he was quite literally dragged away to answer the call to action, pushed into situations, but slowly he developed agency. And as his story progressed, he shifted into an active character in the most spectacular of ways. In a video discussing Dragon Ball GT, Super Eyepatch Wolf pointed out quite accurately that the simple and general theme of Dragon Ball is progression through struggle. And as you might have noticed, the Buu arc wastes no time in establishing that Gohan has slacked off and gotten weaker. He has regressed for the first time in his life, accomplishing little in the arc apart from getting his energy stolen, putting up a decent fight against Dabura, which he was criticized harshly during, being beaten up by Buu, all before the eventual power-up he receives, which comes through, again, no struggle from Gohan. It's handed to him on a silver platter. The theme of Dragon Ball, progression through struggle, was reinforced with Goku's character, who constantly strove for this ideal. But in switching out the character for Gohan, a large disconnect was made thematically, as the character had an entirely new set of ideals that didn't complement with what the show was up until that point. And to compound this problem, what made this all the more striking was that Gohan, up until this point, had embodied this ideal both physically and figuratively throughout his journey. However, now, as a happy adult, he has no struggle. The anger dynamic that enhanced his reactive character is now gone, and the size difference that was once between himself and his foes, while still there, isn't nearly as striking or effective as it once was. So in many ways, a lot of the aspects of the early Gohan character we all loved were not present in the Buu Saga's iteration of the character. So in order for Gohan to work as the new protagonist, Dragon Ball's direction and themes needed to change in a noticeable way to accommodate this new Gohan. And as seen during the beginning of this new arc, it's clear Toriyama was trying something different with the story. A slice of life tale about Gohan getting used to being part of the society he's trying to protect. However, being around the other classic characters like Piccolo and Vegeta, who still upheld the ideals of classic Dragon Ball, only reinforced this sense that something was missing, leaving myself as a writer looking back at the Buu Saga as a whole wondering, why did we spend so much time with Gohan in school? Why did we spend so much time with Videl's character if she didn't play a role in the greater plot? Gohan unlocking his power again seemed unearned and arbitrary and ultimately served no purpose for the story except to waste time. Another poll I took on my Twitter asking which of the Dragon Ball Z arcs was their least favorite emphatically reflects that these thoughts I have are not unique to me. In Robert McKee's book Story, he writes, "The truly passive protagonist is a regrettably common mistake. A story cannot be told about a protagonist who doesn't want anything, who cannot make decisions, whose actions affect no change at any level." Now, to be clear, the jury is still out on whether or not this arc is disjointed because of Gohan losing popularity and thus changing the course of the Buu Saga, or if he lost popularity because he didn't do anything substantial in the arc. And to be clear, the Buu Saga did absolutely have some incredible moments and additions to the story that have lasted the test of time. But all that aside, it begs the question, is it possible to bring Gohan back? Well, yes and no. In my video, Goku the Misunderstood Character, I briefly mentioned how the Gohan character's story was absolutely over and how it ended at Cell. And I stand by that. That version of Gohan isn't coming back, and it shouldn't. But is there a way to make Gohan's modern character a fan favorite again? Absolutely. And this is how I would do it. Gohan is a reactionary character, and so something I'd like from him in the future is a story centered around the philosophy, if you have the potential or power to make the world better, then you should. I am of course basing this story structure off a particular film and character I'm sure you are all aware of with a similar philosophy, that with great power comes great responsibility. I think Gohan's character can take a few leaves from Spider-Man 2. It's a sequel to an ongoing story and features a reactionary protagonist. And a fantastic video by Patrick H. Willems describes this aspect of Peter Parker's story in Spider-Man 2 perfectly.
If the first Spider-Man movie is about Peter Parker learning that with great power comes great responsibility, then Spider-Man 2 is about exploring that responsibility and the consequences of it. It's about the toll that being a superhero takes on the rest of his life. For the whole movie, Peter faces consequence after consequence for being Spider-Man and trying to do the right thing.
Now, imagine if instead of the story that isn't being told about Gohan right now, he was instead struggling to come to terms with having to manage this responsibility he has, and the sacrifices he needs to make to uphold those ideals. Progression through struggle. He's already flamboyant, has an alter ego, and a strong sense of duty which was hinted at towards the beginning of the Buu Saga. I sometimes wonder if this was the original direction Akira Toriyama had in mind for the character, but unfortunately we don't know. And we may never know. In preparation for this video, I went back through my collection of manga. reading various excerpts and passages from Gohan's story. And truthfully, it saddens me to see a character that was once so inspirational and likable fall further and further into the background. So much so that today they aren't present at all in the latest material. And as some of you out there probably have noticed, he's not in the thumbnail of this video either. And the reason the thumbnail of this video features this Gohan and not his older counterpart is because this is the Gohan people love and remember. And unfortunately, the other has been forgotten. Thanks for watching.